Welcome back, brave adventurers, to Dungeons & Disney, where I transform your favorite Disney character into a Dungeons & Dragons hero. In part 1, in the last video, we began the journey of transforming Disney's Princess Aurora into a Dungeons & Dragons Warlock with a patron archfey, Maleficent. Today, we'll dive deeper into the magical details of the concept art character sheet. I really like having a lot of cool stuff on character concept art sheets, and so today we will be working on Aurora's Warlock staff, the Briar rose, and her stunning alternate fantasy outfit inspired by the petals of a rose. I also will be including a couple of facial expressions as well as a color palette and character information. But before we dive in, a quick reminder to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell if you're on YouTube, or hit that follow button if you're on TikTok so you never miss a magical transformation. Also, I have some exciting news for you if you enjoy having a say in who we draw next. The current choices are between Snow White, Captain Hook, and Jane from Tarzan, and you can pledge as little as $1 to vote. The link is in the description, and thank you so much to my current patrons. Now let's get into it. First up, let's craft the Briar Rose, Aurora's Warlock staff. I decided that her arcane focus would most likely be a crystal. I thought it would be the most aesthetically appealing, so I decided to create a weapon that functioned both as her focus and also as something that she could whack monsters away with if she needed to. It's not just a magical weapon. It is an extension of her magic, and I really wanted to have this weapon have just as much personality and character as she does. I was really inspired by how the keyblades were made for Kingdom Hearts, and I always deeply am in awe with the concept art for that game. You can tell very quickly which keyblade belongs to which world, and I wanted to make sure that I carried the same principles into designing this weapon as they did for their concept art. I wanted people to be able to look at this weapon and go, oh yeah, that belongs to Princess Aurora. Now, let's talk fashion. Sometimes I like to include alternate character outfits on sheets, depending on either what the commissioner wants, or if I'm working on concept art and the character happens to be a major part of the film or the game. I think it's important to include alternative outfits. Aurora's alternate outfit draws inspiration from the gentle curves of rose petals, and partially this was a design that was created by patrons. I like to throw up polls on my Patreon for higher tier patrons, and they can help me pick and choose different types of outfits or different parts of a dress to combine together, and it's an interesting challenge from that perspective. But also I wanted to make sure that I gave a little nod to Aurora's original princess outfit. We're talking lots of layers, we're talking fantasy mixed with modern fashion, and I really wanted the skirt portion of this dress to be reminiscent of an unfolding bloom. The dress, of course, has to be the iconic pink of Aurora's princess dress, but I also like to imagine that this dress changes color because magic. Her color palette is retained because that's really the most important thing about this particular type of character design. We want to make sure that we're honoring the original 1950s Aurora design, but I can still add a little bit of fantasy richness to it to place her into the Dungeons & Dragons world a little bit better. Also, there was no way she was going to be in heels for this. I gave her heels like a nice stocky chunky heel for her adventurer's outfit, but for this one I wanted to stick with little ballet slippers because if she has to flee, she's going to be able to flee. She can definitely full on run in this dress, and that is important. By the end of this design, I also wanted to upgrade Aurora's original dress in a way. I recognized that the original costumes for a lot of these Disney princesses were simplified down so that they could be animated, and that results in a lot of loss of detail. 2D animation doesn't necessarily allow you to have the same level of detail as 3D animation simply because you're drawing the same character thousands of times over the span of the course of the feature-length film. And so, because we're not restricted by those constraints, we can add a little bit of extra detail, and it's not going to make it impossible for artists to interpret this character. At this point, I decided to tackle the color palette. I personally like to include little color swatches or color palette references in my character sheets because when I go to draw the character over and over and over, say in a comic scenario, or if you are animating the character, having those color palettes can be really nice and kind of a cheat sheet to use later, or If you're a commissioner who's interested in getting a reference sheet for your character, having those color palettes is crucial because when you pass the reference sheet on to another artist to do another commission potentially, they can have a really easy way to pick and choose those colors using the eyedropper tool in whatever program that they use so that they're not struggling. Expressions are crucial, and this is a more common thing for animation than it is for games, I've noticed, but I like to include them on my sheet. In this instance, they convey Aurora's personality and the experiences that she's gone through. I really do think that Aurora is a quirky and weird princess, and I don't think that we got a lot of fun personality out of her in the 1950s animated film simply because the 50s were a completely different time and they were depicting women in a very specific way. I wanted to give Aurora what I would imagine is perpetual bedhead. Like, I think that this girl legitimately has narcolepsy or something. You know, the curse goes beyond just that one time that she was asleep, and it impacts her day to day. So what does that look like for her? How does she navigate that kind of a curse? And how is that conveyed in her hair being tousled? Or, you know, is she constantly drinking coffee because she's trying to stay awake? Those kinds of things. And so, in my mind, Aurora is just desperately trying to stay awake while also trying to stay alive as she's being attacked by monsters and diving into dungeons. And now we're at the very end. We're getting into the likes and the dislikes. These are never included on professional character sheets that are in like animation or game studios ever, but I love including them on reference sheets because I think that they're fun and they explain the character's backstory a little bit better. The same goes for flavor text. I don't have to describe what the weapon does or where it came from, but from a storytelling standpoint, I find that it gives a little context to my thought process behind the design. Finally, on all of my reference sheets, I like to include a flavor text box that has the name of the character, some interesting details about them, and a quick and brief summary about who the character is and what purpose that they serve in the story. In Aurora's case, I looked up what her canon birthday was, and I also included the symbol for the Dungeons & Dragons Warlock and some brief information about her. And that's it. This is what I would consider a medium complexity character sheet. There are plenty of other things that I could have added, including a backside view of the character. I could have created action key shots of what she looks like when she's doing her abilities or what her magic looks like. But as far as a basic concept art sheet goes, I really like how this turned out, and I think that her silhouette and her design is incredibly fun. I'm so glad that my patrons picked Aurora as the first princess. So here's the final character sheet. I want to take a second and walk you through all of the flavor text and little parts because I'm absolutely in love with how this turned out. So first and foremost, we have likes and dislikes. Under her likes, I put hiking, singing, animal husbandry, espresso, gardening, and horseback riding. This girl lives in the woods. She's probably very familiar with how to do a lot of like manual labor, farmhand stuff. She is definitely what I would consider a folk hero background if we're looking strictly at Dungeons and Dragons, and I think she can really handle herself well in a wilderness survival situation. But most importantly, she needs that coffee so that she can stay awake. She dislikes being treated like a child, arranged marriage, being alone, racism, especially against Fae, unbaked birthday cakes, and urban cities. For her likes and dislikes, I wanted to draw from a lot of the things that were mentioned and touched on in the film, but I did think that particularly because there are so many specific races in Dungeons & Dragons, and that her arch-fae patron, Maleficent, is her godmother, she would also be very upset if people decided to come into her territory and start messing with the fairies that have raised her and protected her entire life. She also doesn't do very well in urban environments because this girl has been raised far away from people her entire life, and she can probably be a little socially awkward. I'd love to read her character bio as well. Aurora is a warlock, gifted her abilities by her patron, her godmother, Maleficent. Charged by her godmother to protect fairies from the wrath of humans, Aurora lives on the outskirts of society, guarding the border between her world and the Fae folk. Though awkward around humans, Aurora does her best to try and help everyone get along. She doesn't often like to resort to violence, but when she does, the earth quakes, and she reminds humans why they should never mess with fairies. I also realize there's a typo there, but we can't all be perfect. There you have it. Thank you for joining me. If you're excited as I am, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.